December 9, 1945, Mannheim, Germany, 10:30 in the morning. The war is over, the Third Reich lies in ashes. Across the broken cities of Europe, American soldiers pack their bags, they write letters home, they count the days until they can forget. But one man cannot forget, and he is not going home, not yet. General George S. Patton Jr. stands at the window of his quarters, watching the gray German winter settle over a conquered land. His ivory-handled revolvers hang at his sides. His boots are polished to a mirror shine. His uniform is immaculate, but something is wrong. For the first time in his military career, George Patton has nothing to fight. "They're killing me, Gay," he says to his chief of staff, Major General Hobart Gay, "not with bullets, with boredom." Gay says nothing. He has learned when to stay silent around old blood and guts. Patton turns from the window. His jaw is set. His eyes burn with the same fire that drove the Third Army across France, through the Ardennes, into the heart of Germany itself. "I've been a soldier for 40 years, and now they want me to shuffle papers, to attend dinners, to smile at the Russians and pretend we're friends." He pauses, his voice drops. "The Russians are not our friends, Gay. They never were, and someone is going to have to say it." What happens next will become one of the most debated events of the 20th century. A simple traffic accident, a routine collision at low speed, and the death of America's most controversial general. Or was it? Section 1, The Last Command. In November 1945, George Patton's military career came to an abrupt and humiliating end. Not on the battlefield, not against the Germans, but in a conference room at Eisenhower's headquarters, where Patton's political comments had finally gone too far. He had compared Nazis to Democrats and Republicans. He had questioned the denazification policy. He had openly criticized the decision to halt his Third Army and allow the Soviets to take Berlin. He had given interviews that embarrassed Washington, London, and everyone in between. On October 2, 1945, General Dwight D. Eisenhower relieved Patton of command of the Third Army. The most successful combat general of the European theater was reassigned to lead the 15th Army, a paper unit, a historical research command, a military graveyard where they sent generals who had become inconvenient. Patton knew what it meant. His enemies had won. "I've been relieved of my command," he wrote to his wife Beatrice. "The official reason is that I criticized the policies that are being followed. The real reason is that I criticized the policies that are being followed too loudly." He had made enemies, powerful enemies, in Washington, in Moscow, in the halls of power where decisions were made far from the sound of gunfire. And now, in December 1945, George Patton was preparing to leave Germany forever. He had been scheduled to fly home on December 10. His bags were packed, his affairs were in order. He would face the press, face Congress, face anyone who would listen. He had things to say, things about the Soviets, things about the future, things that certain people did not want said. But first, there was one final hunting trip, one last day in the German countryside with his friend, Major General Hobart Gay. It should have been routine. Section 2, The Road to Mannheim. December 9, 1945, 9:00 a.m. Patton emerged from his quarters at Bad Nauheim, wearing his hunting clothes beneath his famous leather jacket. His driver, Private First Class Horace Woodring, waited beside the 1938 Cadillac Model 75 limousine that served as Patton's staff car. Gay was already there, so was Patton's dog, a bull terrier named Willie. "Beautiful day for killing pheasants," Patton said. The morning was cold, overcast. A thin mist hung over the German roads, but Patton's mood was lighter than it had been in weeks. Tomorrow he would fly home. Tomorrow he would begin the next battle, the political battle, the battle for the truth. Today he would hunt. They drove north toward Mannheim, where Patton wanted to inspect the remains of Roman ruins before proceeding to the hunting grounds. The car moved at moderate speed through the occupied zone. The roads were rough but passable. Military traffic was light. At 11:40 a.m., they reached the outskirts of Mannheim. Woodring drove carefully. The streets were busy with military vehicles, reconstruction crews, German civilians moving through the rubble of their broken city. Gay sat in the front passenger seat. Patton sat in the back, alone, looking out the window. "Damn shame," Patton said, gesturing at the destruction. "We shouldn't have bombed them so thoroughly. We're going to need them soon enough." Gay turned. "Need them, sir." Against the Russians, you mark my words, Gay, inside of 5 years we'll be fighting alongside the Germans, against our so-called allies. At 11:45 a.m., Private Woodring slowed the Cadillac as they approached a railroad crossing on Route 38. Up ahead, an Army 2.5-ton GMC truck sat perpendicular to the road, blocking the intersection. Its driver appeared to be making a left turn. Woodring applied the brakes gently. The Cadillac was traveling at approximately 30 miles per hour, perhaps less. Then the truck began to move. Not forward, not completing its turn, but directly into the path of the Cadillac. Woodring yanked the wheel, too late. The impact was not violent, a low-speed collision, a scrape of metal, a jolt that barely registered on the Richter scale of automobile accidents. Gay was thrown forward but caught himself. Woodring struck the steering wheel but was uninjured. In the back seat, George Patton's head struck the roof of the car. Or did it? He slumped forward, his neck hung at an impossible angle. "I'm paralyzed," he said, his voice unnaturally calm. "I'm having trouble breathing. This is a hell of a way to die." Section 3. The Broken Warrior. Within minutes, help arrived. Military police, medical personnel, a crowd of soldiers who had no idea they were witnessing the end of a legend. Patton was extracted from the Cadillac with extreme care. He was conscious, alert, still in command. "Jesus Christ," he said to the medics, "what a way to start a vacation." He could not move his arms, he could not move his legs, he could feel nothing below his neck. The greatest practitioner of mobile warfare in modern history was paralyzed from a fender bender. They loaded him into an ambulance, rushed him to the 130th Station Hospital in Heidelberg. Doctors swarmed around him, taking X-rays, assessing the damage. The diagnosis was catastrophic. Third and fourth cervical vertebrae, fractured and displaced, spinal cord crushed, complete quadriplegia. In modern terminology, he had broken his neck. But the medical staff noticed something strange. The injuries were inconsistent with a low-speed collision. The force required to fracture the cervical spine in such a manner would typically require significant trauma, a high-speed crash, a direct impact. Not a 30-mile-per-hour fender bender where no one else was injured. Woodring walked away without a scratch. Gay was shaken but unharmed. Even the truck driver, a man whose identity would become the subject of intense speculation, emerged completely fine. Only Patton was wounded. Only Patton was dying. Section 4. 12 days. George Patton did not die immediately. He fought as he had always fought, with everything he had. For 12 days he lay in room 110 of the Heidelberg Hospital, surrounded by doctors, nurses, his wife Beatrice, who had flown from Massachusetts within hours of receiving the news, and a rotating cast of generals and officials who came to pay their respects. Some came to honor him. Others perhaps came to make sure. The first days were optimistic. Patton's vital signs stabilized. He regained some movement in his arms. The doctors spoke of rehabilitation, of experimental treatments, of the possibility, however slim, that the old warrior might walk again. Patton himself seemed to believe it. "Don't worry about me," he told his wife. "I've been in tough spots before." But then things changed. On December 19, Patton developed pulmonary edema, fluid in the lungs. His breathing became labored. His condition deteriorated rapidly. The doctors administered treatment. Nothing worked. On December 21, 1945, at 5:50 p.m., General George S. Patton Jr. died. The official cause, pulmonary embolism and congestive heart failure. No autopsy was performed. The body was not returned to the United States for burial. Instead, George Patton was buried at the Luxembourg American Cemetery among the soldiers of his Third Army, the warriors he had led, the men who had died under his command. It was what he would have wanted, they said. But was it what really happened? Section 5. The Vanishing Witnesses. In the hours and days following the accident, the U.S. Army conducted an investigation. It was perfunctory, brief, startlingly incomplete. The driver of the GMC truck was identified as Technical Sergeant Robert L. Thompson. He was questioned briefly at the scene. He stated that he had been making a left turn when the Patton vehicle struck his truck. Then he vanished. No formal charges were filed, no court-martial convened, no disciplinary action taken. Thompson was transferred out of Germany within days. His service record became murky. Historians attempting to trace his later life found contradictions, dead ends, missing files. The same was true for the other occupant of the truck, Private First Class Frank Crumbs. Brief statements, then silence. Horace Woodring, Patton's driver, gave his account. He stated that the truck had turned suddenly and unexpectedly into their path, that he had tried to avoid the collision but could not. His account was taken, filed, buried. The official report concluded that the accident was unavoidable and due to road conditions and traffic congestion. Case closed. But questions remained. Why did Patton, and only Patton, suffer catastrophic injuries from a low-speed impact? Why was no autopsy performed on one of the most famous generals in American history? Why did the key witnesses disappear from the historical record so quickly and so completely? And why was the truck blocking that particular road at that particular moment on that particular day? Section 6, Whispers in the Shadows. The conspiracy theories began almost immediately. Among Patton's staff, among his soldiers, among his family, the official story never sat right. That accident was no accident, one of Patton's aides reportedly said. Someone wanted him dead. The suspects were numerous. The Soviets topped every list. Patton had been their most vocal critic in the American military establishment. He had publicly stated that the United States should rearm the German Wehrmacht and march on Moscow while they still had the chance. He had called the Soviets Mongolian savages. He had predicted accurately, as it turned out, that the Cold War was inevitable. Stalin's intelligence services, the NKVD, had assassinated troublesome enemies before. They had the capability, they had the motive, they had agents throughout occupied Germany. But the Soviets were not alone. Patton had enemies in Washington as well. Enemies who feared what he might say upon his return, enemies who worried about his growing popularity with the American public, enemies who saw him as a political threat in the post-war order they were trying to build. The Office of Strategic Services, the OSS, precursor to the CIA, operated throughout occupied Europe. They had capabilities that would not be fully understood for decades. They had orders that were never documented. They had men who knew how to make problems disappear. In 1979, a former OSS operative named Douglas Bazata made an extraordinary claim. Speaking to the Intelligencer, the Journal of U.S. Intelligence Officers, Bazata stated that he had been ordered by OSS Director William Wild Bill Donovan to kill George Patton. "I did it," Bazata said, "not with a bullet, with a staged accident." He claimed that the truck collision was deliberate, that Patton was meant to be killed in the crash, and that when he survived, a follow-up operation was conducted at the hospital to finish the job. Bazata's claims were sensational, controversial, impossible to verify. He was a decorated war hero, a man who had worked in the shadows, a man who had nothing to gain from such a confession. Or was he simply an old man seeking attention? Section 7, What Patton Knew. The most disturbing aspect of the conspiracy theories is that Patton himself believed them. In the weeks before his death, George Patton had repeatedly expressed concern that someone was trying to kill him. "I've been in combat since 1917, he told his nephew Fred Iyer Jr. in late November 1945. "I've been shot at, bombed, shelled, torpedoed. No enemy has ever been able to kill me, but now that the war is over, I feel like I'm in more danger than ever." He had survived multiple close calls that autumn. In September, his airplane had been struck by an ox cart during takeoff, narrowly avoiding disaster. In October, his vehicle had been run off the road by a speeding truck under circumstances that were never satisfactorily explained. In November, he had nearly been struck by a piece of heavy equipment at a construction site. Each incident was minor, each could be explained away, but Patton saw a pattern. "They're trying to get me," he said, "and sooner or later they will." On the morning of December 9, just hours before the fatal collision, Patton had breakfast with his staff. "I'm leaving tomorrow," he said, "if I make it." The words were treated as a joke, dark humor from a man known for his dramatic pronouncements. After the accident, they took on a different meaning. Section 8, The Hospital Mystery. Even if the accident was genuine, questions remain about what happened at the Heidelberg hospital. Patton's condition improved dramatically in the first days following the collision. By December 12, he was strong enough to joke with visitors. By December 14, he was discussing his rehabilitation plans. By December 16, the doctors were cautiously optimistic about his long-term prospects. Then suddenly, everything changed. On December 18, Patton's condition deteriorated sharply. The improvement reversed. His vitals crashed. His lungs filled with fluid. 3 days later, he was dead. What happened in those final days? The official explanation points to the inherent risks of cervical spine injuries, blood clots, pulmonary complications, the cascade of medical failures that can occur when the body is immobilized. But others have suggested darker possibilities. Bazada claimed that Soviet agents were embedded in the hospital staff, that they had administered something, a drug, a toxin, a carefully timed intervention, to ensure that Patton would not survive. Medical historians have noted that the rapid deterioration was unusual but not impossible, that pulmonary embolism is a known risk in paralysis cases, that sometimes, despite the best care, patients simply die. But the absence of an autopsy means that no one can know for certain. And that absence in itself is suspicious. George Patton was the highest-ranking American to die in Europe after the war, a figure of immense historical importance, a man whose death was already the subject of whispered speculation. Why would the army not perform an autopsy? Why would they not want to know exactly what killed him? Section 9. The Soviet Perspective. If the Soviets were involved, what would their motive have been? The answer lies in understanding how dangerous Patton was to Soviet interests. By late 1945, the alliance between Washington and Moscow was already fraying. The wartime partnership was giving way to the Cold War. Stalin was consolidating Soviet control over Eastern Europe. The Iron Curtain was descending. And Patton was screaming warnings that no one wanted to hear. He had seen the Red Army up close. He had watched them occupy territory that the Western Allies could have taken. He had witnessed their brutality toward German civilians. He had studied their military capabilities and found them formidable, but not unstoppable. "We can take them," Patton told anyone who would listen. "If we move now, while we're strong and they're exhausted, we can push them back to the Volga. We can liberate Eastern Europe. We can prevent 50 years of Soviet tyranny." No one listened. Washington wanted peace. The American public was tired of war. The atomic bomb had just been used on Japan. No one had the stomach for another conflict. But Patton would not stop talking. And he was about to go home. Once on American soil, he would have access to the press, to Congress, to the court of public opinion. He could speak freely without the constraints of military command. He could rally support for a more confrontational policy toward Moscow. For Stalin, this was intolerable. The NKVD had eliminated threats before: Ukrainian nationalists, Polish officers, Soviet defectors. A troublesome American general would be just another name on a long list. If they did act, they would never admit it. Soviet archives from the period remain largely closed. What documents exist are fragmentary and unreliable. But the capability was there, the motive was there, the opportunity was there. And Patton ended up dead. Section 10. The American Perspective. The Soviet theory is compelling, but it is not the only possibility. What if the threat came from closer to home? By December 1945, George Patton had become a problem for the American establishment. He had embarrassed Eisenhower with his political statements. He had undermined the occupation policy with his pro-German sympathies. He had violated direct orders from the War Department about what he could and could not say in public. Worse, he was about to return to the United States as a conquering hero. Patton was popular, enormously popular. The press loved him. The public adored him. He was a symbol of American military might, the swashbuckling general who had smashed the German army and brought victory to Europe. Some in Washington saw political potential, others saw political danger. What would Patton say when he reached home? What secrets would he reveal? What accusations would he make? He knew things about the decision to halt at the Elbe, about the agreements made with the Soviets at Yalta, about the internal disputes that had shaped the final campaigns of the war. He had opinions, strong opinions, opinions that contradicted the official narrative being constructed by Washington. And he was not the kind of man to keep his mouth shut. For those who wanted a smooth transition to peacetime, who wanted the wartime alliance with Moscow to be remembered as a noble partnership, who wanted the uncomfortable questions about the post-war order to remain unasked, George Patton was a liability. Would they have killed him? The idea seems extreme, paranoid, the stuff of conspiracy theorists and pulp novels. But the OSS was capable of extreme measures. The wartime government had demonstrated a willingness to bend the rules in the name of national security, and the stakes, as they saw them, were enormous. The record is murky, the documents are missing, the witnesses are long dead. We will never know for certain. Section 11, Historical Verdict. So what really happened on that German road in December 1945? The official answer is clear: a routine traffic accident, a freak injury, a medical complication that proved fatal, nothing more. Historian Carlo D'Este, in his definitive biography of Patton, concluded that the conspiracy theories were unsupported by evidence. There is nothing to suggest that the accident was anything other than what it appeared to be, D'Este wrote, a tragic, random event that cut short an extraordinary life. Other historians agree. The chaos of post-war Germany, the poor road conditions, the unreliable vehicles, all of these factors made accidents common. Patton's injury, while unusual, was not impossible. The lack of an autopsy, while regrettable, was not unprecedented. But not everyone is convinced. Robert Wilcox, author of Target, Patton, spent years investigating the circumstances of the general's death. He concluded that Bazada's claims were credible and that the accident was likely staged. The official story doesn't hold up, Wilcox argues. The injuries don't match the collision. The witnesses disappear. The investigation is buried. Someone wanted Patton dead and someone made it happen. Tim Ripley, another military historian, takes a more measured view. We may never know the truth, he writes, but the questions are legitimate, and the fact that we're still asking them 75 years later tells us something about how this case was handled. The truth is that the evidence is ambiguous. The official story is plausible but unsatisfying. The conspiracy theories are intriguing but unprovable. What we know for certain is this. George S. Patton Jr., the most aggressive and successful combat general of World War II, died under circumstances that have never been fully explained. He died just before he could return home. He died just before he could speak freely. He died with his enemies watching. And he died believing that someone was trying to kill him. Section 12, The Last Word. December 21, 1945, Heidelberg, Germany, 5:50 in the evening. General George S. Patton lies in room 110. His wife Beatrice holds his hand. The doctors have done everything they can. It is not enough. Outside the window, the German winter deepens. The snow falls on a broken continent. The soldiers of the Third Army prepare to go home. The war is over. But for one man, there will be no homecoming. Patton's eyes are open. His mind is clear. He knows what is happening. It's too dark, he says. It's too dark. These are the last words of George S. Patton Jr., a warrior who charged against the Kaiser's army in 1918, who invaded North Africa and Sicily, who led the breakout from Normandy and the relief of Bastogne, who crossed the Rhine and shattered the Wehrmacht, who never lost a battle, who never stopped fighting. Silenced by a fender bender. Or was he? 75 years later, the question still echoes through the corridors of history. The official story offers closure. The conspiracy theories offer doubt. But perhaps the strangest thing is not how Patton died. It is why the most anticlimactic end imaginable, a traffic accident, a hospital bed, a quiet fading away, feels so wrong for a man who lived for glory and expected to die on the battlefield. I've been a soldier for 40 years, Patton had said that last morning. He had survived everything the 20th century could throw at him: the trenches of the Western Front, the deserts of Africa, the hedgerows of Normandy, the frozen forests of the Ardennes. And then on a quiet German road, on a gray December morning, with the war won and his enemies defeated. It was over. Not with a bang, but with a collision at 30 miles per hour. Not from enemy fire, but from a truck making a left turn. Not on the battlefield, but on a Sunday morning hunting trip. George Patton died the way he least expected, and perhaps that is the most suspicious thing of all. The questions remain, the answers do not. And somewhere in the archives, in the missing files and the vanished witnesses, in the memories of men long dead, the truth lies buried. Just like the general himself. Fade to black.